Denmark is going ahead with plans to send refugees to camps outside cities and delay family reunifications, as well as confiscating valuables from refugees, as is happening in parts of Germany and Switzerland. Are states entitled to enforce these kinds of rules on new arrivals, or are they violating human rights? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. So, Denmark has long been seen as a champion of openness and tolerance, but that reputation is looking shaky. The Danish government, like some other European countries, is considering applying drastic new rules that will curb the rights of refugees. The UN says the plans could fuel fear and xenophobia. Others say the Danes are turning their backs on their international commitments. Denmark took in a record 20,000 refugees last year, making it one of the top destinations per capita for migrants. The debate over the new arrivals has become highly politicised, and like elsewhere in Europe, tensions have begun to emerge between locals and the new arrivals. So, the bill at the centre of this controversy is an amendment to the Danish Aliens Act. It will allow Danish authorities to seize refugees' cash exceeding around $1,500 and any items worth that amount. Only sentimental items like wedding rings will be exempt. The bill would also force refugees to wait 3 years instead of 1 before they can apply to bring over family members. And the Danish government is working on a plan to build villages for refugees outside cities and towns. Some tent camps have already been set up for single male refugees. All right, let's now bring in our guests. From Copenhagen, we're joined by Jonas Christoffersen, Executive Director of the Danish Institute for Human Rights. Moving to Vienna, we have Kilian Kleinschmidt, Chairman of Switchboard, an innovation and planning agency. He also led the former UNHCR manager at the Zaatari refugee camp. And in Berlin, we have Julian Lehmann, who is a human rights and refugee policy specialist at the Global Public Policy Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. I should just say that we did ask government supporters of the bill to appear on the programme, but they declined. So let's get into it. Let's speak to Jonas Christoffersen first of all. Jonas, tell us how much support there is across Denmark for this policy. Do the majority of people there think it's a good idea?
In the current situation, the majority of the population seems to be behind the government in tightening immigration laws and these various other measures. And there's a very strong support in Parliament behind this.
And from the government's point of view, I guess this is indicative of just how impossible the situation has become. They would argue, I guess, that they have no alternative.
That's exactly right. That is exactly the government's argument. The government is basically saying we have to protect Denmark, and the first step to protecting Denmark is to keep refugees out of Denmark. And the best way to keep them out of Denmark is to deter them from even seeking asylum in Denmark. And the way to do that is to communicate that we don't really want them to come to Denmark, and the living conditions here will not be as beneficial as they might otherwise think they are.
Right, and from your point of view as Executive Director of the Danish Institute for Human Rights, you must find that very hard to swallow, don't you?
Well, basically, with the National Human Rights Institution, so basically we have a legal mandate to see that the threshold of international human rights law is not overstepped. I would see we have some issues on some details in the overall packages, but our main concern is that Denmark is spearheading the race towards the bottom of human rights protection in Europe. We are, and the government is saying we want to be one of the toughest regimes on immigration and asylum law in Denmark, because Denmark is otherwise a beneficial country to go to. And because we are going in that direction, Sweden is following, Norway is following, and other countries is likely to follow as well. So we will see a movement we're likely to see a movement in Europe where governments and parliaments are treating refugees worse and worse in order to get them to seek asylum in other countries.
Right, so but I take it that you don't think it's acceptable.
It certainly isn't beneficial to refugees.
I take it that you don't think it's acceptable to people that people's valuables should be taken, that unifying families can now be delayed for 3 years.
The family reunification issue is where we have the strongest legal obligations. We don't see that this can be compatible with international human rights law to recognize people have a need for international protection and then say, but they can't spend time with their families until after 3 years. We find that is a violation of international human rights law.
Okay, let's hear now from Kilian Kleinschmidt, very experienced in refugee situations. And this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, Denmark are in the same problem that many European countries are in, that when it gets to this point, the sheer numbers crossing the borders, inevitably you're going to see these kind of draconian laws coming into play.
Yes, we have seen here in Austria a movement and a decision to cap the number of people coming into the country during the year over the next 3 years. 37,500 planned for this year to come in, not one more. These are unrealistic, scary measures governments seem to take. And I would say the scary bit is that we will see actually a deterioration of our security in Europe because we are going to promote illegal migration, people getting around the systems instead of going towards the systems. And so we will see, in fact, insecurity as part of the future of migration. And that is absolutely not what we need and how migration should be managed.
Right, but maybe those sort of problems will be discouraged by these perceived brutal measures that we're seeing in Denmark and Austria, as you've just mentioned, and Germany too, that people would say that need to be taken to discourage migrants from trying to enter Europe in the first place.
But there will come. Germany is desperately looking for more than 300,000 people where they have no clue where they are. Do you believe also the whole approach to think that hotspots in Greece or Italy, where a number of people shall be deported back to their countries because they're allegedly safe and where people live in prosperity, will actually tackle the issue of migration? No, the pressure is very high, and the way forward is a very complex, admittedly complex mix and sort of menu of different measures in the areas and the regions of origin, but of course primarily to actually legalize migration, open legal channels, manage channels of migration instead of these ridiculous measures which are simply trying to answer some of the populist demands, but there are no solutions.
Julian Lehmann, you're in Berlin, in Germany. How do you see it?
Well, look, we've already had for quite some time a measure here in Germany where people who seek asylum are basically treated equally. That's at least the view that is presented by the policymakers, treated equally to all other people who seek social benefits. So they, similar to what is now implemented in Denmark, they also have to give away their valuables. So I can only underline what has been said before. These are deterrence policies, and these are deterrence policies with the view to making the countries relatively less popular. But I mean, the numbers that we've been seeing in the past couple of months and even years prove that deterrence policies are not going to be effective. People are not going to not come because they will lose a couple of dollars when they arrive here. I mean, 91% of those arriving in Greece come from Syria, Iraq, or Afghanistan. I don't think that money issues are going to stop them. This is basically an issue that is decided in the country of origin.
Right, so however hard you make it to enter specific countries, you think the refugees will just keep on coming anyway?
Exactly.
Let me come back to Kilian Kleinschmidt in Vienna. The Danish Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen has suggested that Denmark may go on to seek a revision of the UN Refugee Convention if this refugee crisis continues or gets worse. That's pretty concerning, isn't it?
It is absolutely impossible to touch one of the strongest instruments of international law and international protection. Obviously, in fact, what we need is to look into what we would call today desperate migration and to find ways to how to manage such a migration which is triggered by poverty, but also by climate change, which will be pushing a lot of people to move on. Again, let's not forget the prime burden, if you wish, of migration, of flight, of escaping from situations is borne by poor nations, by poor people, by the populations, not by states.
And Jonas Christoffersen, with the Danish Prime Minister saying such things, there's a huge irony there, isn't there? Because Denmark was one of the first signatories of the UN Refugee Convention.
Well, basically Denmark was leading the negotiations and also the first country to sign the Refugee Convention. However, I might try to throw in a little bit of help for our Prime Minister. What he also said when he said that maybe you should change the rules of the game, meaning the international human rights regime, he also said, but if you have to take this seriously, Denmark cannot do it alone. And he may have actually tried to put the debate aside on these issues, say we have to work within the current framework, and we haven't seen any follow-up on it. That being said, we have of course also been very critical towards that approach, because it simply does not help the problem to do away with these international obligations. And we haven't heard, by the way, anybody in Denmark suggesting that if we didn't have the international obligations, we would send people back to torture and ill treatment or war in Syria. So basically they are in desperate, politicians here in Denmark are in desperate search for policies that work. And while they are thinking about something that might work, they're pointing at things that they basically do know will not work.
So, but when he says change the rules of the game, what do you think he means? What kind of ideas might he have?
Well, basically, I think one of the one of the ideas that Danish politicians are playing with is that if only we could get third countries to take our asylum seekers, or if we could get, that was a suggestion yesterday by a political party, if we could get establish UN-run camps in the neighboring countries to where the refugees originally come from, then we could send the refugees back to those camps. And then we could take some quota of refugees that we would determine ourselves. So if only we could export asylum seekers back to somewhere else, that would be best.
Kilian Kleinschmidt, is that a runner, Kilian? Is that a runner, UN-run camps in neighbouring countries?
I mean, number one, we must run camps differently. It's a fact. These are not just storage facilities. These must become living spaces. Very few of the refugees in the world actually live in camps, because camps, as they are, quite often inhuman. So that's the number one. Secondly, I believe that the demand for a just redistribution, if you want, a burden sharing, has been made for decades by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Very little has been done. Quota accepted by the states have been ridiculous. However, I think what is good to know is, very important to know, is that on the 19th of September, there will be finally a summit on the issue of forced displacement, refugees and migration in New York. And that process should actually look into how are we equipped globally, not only Europe or Denmark or Austria or Germany, how we're globally equipped to deal with the challenges of the 21st century, which will be very, very strong population movements, certainly a type of mixed movements where we have people falling classically under the Refugee Convention, but again, a lot of people not being able to access their basic human rights in their places of origin.
The trouble is, at the time, Julian Lehmann, is extremely limited, isn't it? Not only for the refugees themselves, because clearly there needs to be some kind of solution, but also for the, as Manuel Valls said, the French Prime Minister put it, for the European project, because he said the project could die not in decades or in years, but extremely fast.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the pressure is on the rise here. I mean, if you've been following the German debate, we've had calls for ceilings, so for absolute numbers, to have maximum numbers of refugees that are accepted in. And it's putting a lot of pressure not only on the European neighbor states, but also internally within Germany. But let me get back to this question quickly on changing the rules of the game. I think we're entering a very dangerous route if we start making suggestions like this. I mean, it basically also shows the helplessness of some of the policymakers, just as the deterrence mechanisms do show the helplessness. I mean, there's an attempt, and the Austrian Prime Minister has given an interview today where he said very explicitly that those who come from Turkey are no longer to be regarded as refugees, even though under international law there's nothing that would compel a person to seek asylum in the first country where he can practically demand asylum. So I mean, we're in a mismatch of legal norms and the policy debate. And I'm not questioning, and I don't think anybody is questioning, that we do need a fair amount of realpolitik in this, in conceiving effective responses. But tearing apart, ripping apart the international legal framework that also has helped respond to this in the years before, I don't think is a good idea.
Jonas Christoffersen, would you like to come back to that?
But basically, it's the same argument that we see in Denmark, and I think what I try to do normally is say, but we tried this in Europe already. We said that the country where the refugees first were registered under the Eurodac regulation, and then also if they sought asylum, then we could send them back to that first country. And it simply
so this is the so-called Dublin Agreement,
the system in Greece and later in Italy broke down. The Dublin system basically imploded, and we saw that coming. It's been many years that we've been looking at it, and nobody assisted Italy and Greece. And I think that just goes to show that we simply haven't understood and realized the magnitude of this challenge which is facing Europe. And we are behaving like we could make the problem go away. While the problem has been increasing in front of our eyes, we've been turning our back to and say maybe it will go away and we can do something else. And I'm afraid that we're only seeing the beginning of it.
Absolutely.
And
but
unless we try to do differently, we basically have to accept the cost of this world.
Right, but when people are talking about the potential of conventions being rewritten, the UN's refugee agency itself concluding that Denmark will be in violation of the European Convention of Human Rights, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the UN Refugee Convention. I mean, for you as executive director of the Danish Institute for Human Rights, it must be incredibly troubling.
I'm deeply saddened by this situation that I'm facing. We have been out warning against this, raising our voice. We've been saying that, and we've been talking to lawyers already about supporting strategic litigation of some of these issues. But my main concern really is not so much Denmark, what happens here. I mean, we're a small country in a much larger world. It's the role that we had, the mentality that used to preoccupy Danish politicians was this perspective of basically making sure that individuals in our country would be treated fairly and in accordance with the minimum international standards. And we were one of the front runners building up the system over the last 17 years. And if we in 6 months, 8 months begin basically to turn our backs to it, I'm afraid what other countries might also do. And that's really disturbing if it spreads outside of Denmark.
Absolutely. And Kilian Kleinschmidt, this is the thing, isn't it? It's evident that societies potentially here are on the cusp of big change on this very important issue. And perhaps it's impossible to avoid it, that we simply cannot preserve the old ways, given this massive influx that we've seen, we haven't seen the like of since 1880, something like that.
I think what is even more scary is that we will probably, let me be a little bit positive on some of the situations. We will probably see some form of, let's say, change in the Syria situation. Let's assume over the next couple of years there would be some form of a freeze, at least, of the conflict, at least in some parts of the country. Similarly in Iraq. We have seen the lifting of the sanctions in Iran. Iran will have the improvement of the situation in Iran will have an influence on the way of how Afghans actually move on. In Iran will become an option again for many Afghans actually in search of work and so on. So what we will see, an assumption, is a change into really the pure sense of what we consider as migration, not refugees per se coming, but people, again, of a sort of a very, very mixed background from Africa, from different parts. And that will actually get away that these current emotions we have, the support at least we have within also the European population for people who come from conflict areas. So I think we really will have a big challenge ahead of us, how we deal with really the consequences of a world which is very mobile. Globalization is taking place, information exchange, the network is functioning extremely well. So that would be the real challenge to look forward to. Of course, again, there shall be and there cannot be any attempt to change the rights for refugees to seek protection as they deserve.
Right, but the thing is, Julian Lehmann, is that these conventions and agreements, when they were set up, they never foresaw the sheer scale of what we're seeing now and the problems that these vast numbers of refugees are creating for individual countries who are concerned about their own individual rights and problems, as well as the pan-European issue.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there is no maximum number named in any of these instruments. So in theory, they're open-ended. But of course, you do see the political realities that host societies are not willing to accept open-ended admission. And it's true that what is at stake now is not only the rules of the game, how we balance this out with our human rights obligations, but is also, I mean, the losing of some of the political center and some of the liberal values that we have in the EU, right? I mean, the existence of the EU as a liberal democracy. So, I mean, as I said, on the one hand, no ceilings, no maximum numbers in these instruments. At the same time, obviously, it's shaped by political realities. And this is what is determining the debate now, that policymakers have to respond to very acute pressures that threaten their say in power.
Right, exactly. And so, Jonas Christoffersen, if we can finish up with you, the question is, I suppose, where do you draw the line between countries wanting to protect their own integrity and yet helping those desperately in need?
Well, I think that's where the Refugee Convention, human rights instruments still have a role to play, even if they were written originally a long time ago. I think today we have, it's not only populistic demand, I think it's also a very legitimate concerns about what will be the financial cost of receiving refugees in a welfare state which is funded by taxpayers in a country like Denmark. What will be our prospects of integrating these people into Danish society by way of language and education, employment and so on? What can we really take this burden on and give these people a life which is well functioning here? Those are legitimate concerns. The problem is that the alternative to give them protection in Denmark is, one, give them protection somewhere else, which isn't practical at this moment, or send them back to where they came from, where they saw prosecution and so on. And we don't want that either. So we're really stuck in a true dilemma with between legitimate concerns and no real prospect of a solution, because the world hasn't yet gone together around finding a solution, and that is the true concern. So I don't think we should point fingers too much as politicians. We should recognize the dilemma and also of the surrounding society. It is a true dilemma. My line is where there are clear international human rights violations. That's where we have drawn a line in our criticism.
Okay, and we have to there draw a line in our programme. Let's hope for some signs of optimism and change at some point in the near future. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Jonas Christoffersen, Kilian Kleinschmidt and Julian Lehmann. Thank you. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on the programmes page of our website, aljazeera.com. And you can indeed post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or just tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and all the team here, it's goodbye for now.